Hi, my name is Alex and welcome to Magic Missile Minis. Today I'm going to be walking you guys through how to do Warhammer 40k conversions on the cheap. 40k conversions can be a lot of fun. I personally love converting miniatures and customizing them to make my own armies and such, but it can also be very, very expensive. When you're already spending $60 on a one Warhammer kit, to buy another $60 Warhammer kit is oftentimes too expensive for most people. So I was trying to figure out a way to get into 40k conversions without breaking the bank, as it were. What I found was the Orc Gretchen kit, or the Runt Herd kit, I think is what it's called as well sometimes. It is a $20 kit that comes with 10 different miniatures, which is a steal and is perfect for conversions if you want to do some orc stuff. By buying this $20 kit, you're cutting 1/3 off the price of buying 2 kits normally, and it also just functions as a great introduction to conversions because orc miniatures are usually fairly haphazard anyway, so you can kind of just stick stuff together and see what it looks like, and it can fit really well into the orc aesthetic. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. I've got these Orc Gretchen that I bought, as well as half a kit from an old conversion that I had done a little bit prior, and we're going to smoosh them together and see what happens. The kit I decided to kit bash my orcs with was the Cataphragm Battle Servitors, which was a Adeptus Mechanicus set I had used for another conversion, but I hadn't used these like tank tread parts that came with it. Here you can see I start assembling one of the Orc Gretchen, and this guy specifically with these 2 raised arms holding the grenade, I find to be really useful because what that can turn into is 2 arms pushing a crank of some kind. So for this guy, I decided I'm going to have him manning some kind of like larger artillery weapon that came with the Cataphragm Battle Servitors set. I really like using Adeptus Mechanicus miniatures for conversions if you guys are looking into what kind of sets to convert with, because they always have these larger cannons that are useful for whatever miniatures you're working on, but they always have these little mechanical doodads that you can use in a bunch of different ways to make your miniatures look really, really cool when you're kit bashing. You can see that I used some of the side plating that would go on the sides of the treads as a little platform for this guy. And this is part of the reason that making orc conversions are a great way to start, because everything is already supposed to be haphazard. So it's a great way that you can get used to just kind of sticking things places and seeing how it looks and not having to worry too much about everything being super pristine, because it's supposed to look slapped together and haphazard. Here, I took 2 more bits from the Cataphragm Battle Servitors set that were supposed to go over the treads, I'm pretty sure, and stuck them together to create a small platform. This was going to be attached to the front of the tank because I wanted to make sure that I could stick another one of our Orc Gretchen somewhere on this miniature. I think that's kind of the fun thing about them, is that you can kind of stick them anywhere because they just be hanging off the sides of these whatever kind of machines you make. I took a little bit of styrene tubing here to make sure that the fit was really, really secure. And since nobody's going to see the bottom of the mini, I'm not too worried about it looking pretty. I then go back to our sprue of Gretchen and find one that I like and stick him on front of the miniature. Here I took the guy that's aiming down the rifle. Also, as you can see, I'm using a plastic cement glue rather than like a super glue that melts the plastic, which is really useful for these conversions, because it makes a lot stronger of a bond between the different pieces of plastic. Here you can see I add some grenades I had from, I think, a Space Marine set, just to add a little bit of detail onto this guy since his back was facing the front of the miniature. I then go ahead and find a head that I liked. I got this guy with the big helmet to be running the artillery cannon. I think there's about a 6-month gap between the last 2 clips since I started this project up again, hence the change in lighting. But here I take this larger fortification piece and I glue that onto the 2 treads to try to make this guy a little bit wider, since I wanted to have more of the little Orc Gretchen on here. I very quickly realized that this amount of contact, even with the cement, is not nearly enough. So I take this piece of like tacky something and glue that on there to try to support all of these pieces and make sure it's not going to fall apart as soon as you hold it. I found this piece to kind of finish off the design of that part, gluing it together with more of the plastic cement glue. I then shaved down a little bit of the platform I had added so that I could glue on these extra bits and make the platform even bigger. Then, to cover up these areas that didn't have anything going on, I found the two covers for the treads, and I decided to glue them in at these kind of weird angles. I don't know, it seemed kind of interesting to me. So I just stuck them on there and hoped that I'd figure out what to do with them later. Again, this is an orc miniature, it doesn't have to make tons of sense. Speaking of orcs, I go back to my Gretchen sprue and cut out a couple of these guys so that I can populate this miniature. I wanted this mini to be a little bit more of like a transport for the Gretchen rather than having a large gun on it. So I assemble a couple of these guys. This is probably my favorite head from this set. The guy with the goggles is just yelling. I don't know, he's just kind of my favorite of all the heads that you can choose for these guys. Here, I am actually editing this one guy because I wanted him to be in a little bit more of a relaxed pose. So I chopped off his arm and I reattached it at a little bit more of a downward angle. So he looked like he was just kind of chilling. You know, he was just like a chill guy rather than having his guns kind of like raised in the air. And also, because of the way these miniatures are done, they're very two-dimensional because they kind of have to be. And so doing that helped make this miniature a little bit more three-dimensional. Here you see me attaching another one of the guys, as well as this little random doodad to make it interesting. And this little cap is what I decided to cover the hole that was in the front of the miniature. With that finished, we can move on to painting. Here I'm using a primer that is not a spray-on primer, it's a paint-on primer. It's technically supposed to be for an airbrush, but I just decided to brush it on because I don't have an airbrush or any spray-on primers. I use 2 thin coats to avoid losing any of the details, especially when using a primer, and then I base coat the whole thing in this game color gunmetal. I personally really like this specific metal paint. For a while I was using Vallejos, but the glitter in it was just a little bit excessive. I also base color in metal this time just because of all of the different techie bits and how much technology I would have to cover in the metal paint anyways. I just think that it's going to be easier to paint on all of the other little colors rather than having to try to paint the glittery metallic and have that peeking through on all the skin and all the other parts of the miniature. Speaking of which, I start the orc skin by using this flat green from Vallejo's model color. For this paint job, rather than doing the darkest tone and then working my way up into lighter tones, because of that I knew that would take a really long time and I had to do a lot of painting, I decided that I would base coat it in a mid-tone, use a dark wash to get all of the shadows, and then just dry brush any highlights onto it. Now that the metal had dried, I take this game color gold and some of this model color flat red and mix them together to create a copper. This is just generally how I do metals, is especially when you have a large chunk of a bunch of different metal bits and like pistons and different things. I go in with a copper or a brass to just distinguish a couple pieces within the just kind of white noise of mechanical parts. And I find that it just adds a little bit of depth and interest and helps you latch on to something when you're looking at what otherwise would just be a kind of wall of metal, of gunmetal, that you can't really distinguish what any of the details are. So I go around both miniatures, adding little copper highlights here and there. You can see it to the guns, as well as to these like round parts on the larger plating that we had added to this part of the miniature. I then take some of Vallejo Model Color's refractive green and mix it in with a little bit of the yellow ochre color they use, which looks a lot more yellow after I film it, I realized, than normal. I then take that highlight and start dry brushing it onto these miniatures with a dry brush that I actually got recently that was made for this. It was kind of working okay. I think I wasn't quite patient enough and letting the green dry, so it was a little bit more like wet blending than dry brushing. The paint that I was using was a little too wet, and the miniatures underneath were a little bit too wet, but in the end it seemed to kind of work out as far as a start for highlights, hitting just parts where I decided the light was coming from and not hitting the entire miniature with this highlight. I then took a brush with the paint on it. Since I was already wet blending anyway at this point, I started doing a couple touches here and there at the parts that I wanted to be lighter with the same paint, mixing a little bit of yellow ochre in each time to bring out the highlight. I like to use yellow rather for a green. I like to use a yellow rather than a white to create the highlights because you keep the vibrancy of the color, which is just generally a good tip. Here, I take the lightest green as possible, and I just do a little bit of edge highlighting on the lightest parts and any, well, edges to bring out the most prominent parts of all of these Gretchen. This, for me, is probably my favorite part of painting, is doing all of these highlights and really making them work. I don't know, there's something very satisfying about seeing this part, and it really just makes the miniatures come alive. I don't know, this is my personal favorite part of painting miniatures, is getting to put on these highest highlights and just seeing how dynamic the contrast can be with these miniatures. Having done the skin, I go onto all of their clothing. Again, I take some more of the yellow ochre to put for this guy's shirt and some of the wraps around the miniatures. I'll be using a dark brown wash over all of this clothing to make sure that all the details are there, but also to keep the yellow from being too intense and it looking a little bit more like a more natural, kind of grungy material that's been there for ages and looks kind of just dirty. I then take some Vallejo Model Color Flat Brown and use that to base coat all of the leather. So here's got this guy's suspenders, and I also add that to this guy's belt here and any other leather on the entire miniature. I then want to do some detailing. So I take this flat blue, some Blood for the Blood Gods, which I'm pretty sure is actually an effects paint, not a regular paint, and Vallejo Model Color White to create a light pink and a light blue for the colors for this army. Here you can see that I'm stenciling on Ugly, or UGLE, which is the name of this army that I came up with, which is just a bunch of rebel grots that have created their own little army. The little logo stands for United Grot Legions Everywhere. I don't know, I just thought it was kind of funny to have all these guys that are just running around stealing other people's stuff and their own little army. But yeah, so the colors I thought would be kind of funny for that would be this like baby blue and this pink that would be on all of their stuff. So I go around adding it obviously to the little decal that I painted, and then I wanted this guy's helmet to be half of each color. Here you can see I'm adding some of the pink, just little zigzags. I wanted it to feel very like rough and painted on like they had painted it on themselves, obviously with not much skill or precision. It's just very haphazard, like war paint, but it's baby blue and bright pink. I don't know, something about that's very funny to me and just kind of ridiculous. With all of the pinks and blues added to the miniature, I go over each of the little guys and I give them a spot of red paint for each of their eyes. And then once that is done, I go ahead and add the like laser bit to this cannon here. I feel like I've seen so many Instagram videos where it's just painting these specific parts. Either way, I don't know that I did a very good job. I just added some white and then add some increasingly dark highlights going around to create like the effect that it was glowing, a little bit of white around it. After that, I give the entire miniature a baptism in Nuln Oil, a dark wash that you used to get in all the crevices. I know that any professional miniature painters are probably crying at the amount of Nuln Oil I'm using, but you know, it gets the job done. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'm really pleased with these little guys. I don't know, I find the grots really funny, these little space goblins, and the idea of this united front of space goblins. I don't know, it's very entertaining to me. And so I was thinking, if you guys want to make this specific version of the Grot Legions or whatever, I'd love for you guys to tag me on Instagram, post the conversions that you make. Hopefully this inspires you guys to get a little creative with some extra Warhammer bits you have laying around. If you do, get into conversions if that's what you've been looking to do for a while. And if you post on Instagram, tag me. I'd love to see what additions to the ugly army you guys make. But that's the end of this video. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to check out my band, Kin. Here's what one of our songs sound like.
What could be worse than the bitter curse of acting like a kid?
There will be links to all of that in the description. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like, do all the things. Commenting is super, super helpful as well, just to get these videos out there. I would love to do this full time, and all of those little interactions make the algorithm gods happy. So go ahead and do that. And without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next video.